Thank you everybody for allowing me to speak here. 非常感谢受到你们的欢迎，非常感谢大家观众。So I want to talk today a little bit about the changes we're seeing to the space sector and the space economy. But first, I want to use myself as a case study to show the changes that have happened just in the last 15 years or so. So I'm from New Jersey, 我来自美国新泽西州. And growing up, I, like almost everybody else, I love space. You know, space and dinosaurs. 太空,恐龙,我喜欢非常好. But like many other people, I didn't really see space as a real opportunity for my career. And there are a couple of reasons for that. You know, number one, who goes to space? No one. It's something that you observe, it's not something you take part in. That was my thought process as a child. 不要参加航天实验，只要看。But when I got to high school, it became time for me to take a language to study. So I went to my mom and I go, you know, should I learn French? Should I learn Chinese? Should I learn Latin? She goes, Chinese food is delicious, you should learn Chinese. And it was that simple. So that's the real reason I started learning Chinese. 我是为了填补我才来学好中文. Anyway, it kind of went on like that for a few years, and I got to college. I went to Hamilton College in upstate New York, and I was lucky enough to have met Ji Laoshi, and she was one of the foremost Chinese educators in the United States. When I arrived, she basically said, here's what's going to happen. You study for 4 years, you're going to go on, you're going to go to China, you're going to learn more about Chinese culture, and you're going to be fantastic. And I was very lucky to have met her. During my time at Hamilton, I also applied, almost as a joke, to be an intern at NASA Ames Research Center in California. Because, you know, again, who gets that job? Who works at NASA? And that was still my thought process. But I got it. 我在上大学的时候，我申请到一个在 NASA 的实习，在他们的国际关系部。在这个情况下，我学好一些在航天方面他们怎么做的国际关系。我觉得我发现这个一者非常有意思，二者我自己真的可以参加。I found that I could actually take part in those activities in space, and it's really the first time that became a possibility. So then I came and I studied in China, and I was here and I drove my professors crazy because in their mind, and in many people's minds, I was supposed to attend class and then go directly to study in my room. 每天都要学好100多个字. Every day you want to study more than 100 characters. And it was tough, but I didn't do that. Instead, 下课之后我就要直接的去一个咖啡馆，或者去工作。我当了一个服务员，就是为了好好学中文，就是本地的真实的中文，还有比较了解中国真实的文化。So instead of going to study my room after class, I would go to a coffee shop and meet normal Chinese people, and I would talk to them normally in order to actually understand local Chinese culture. And I find that that was very helpful to me. Because although I might not know some of the most formal Chinese characters, I do have a thick Beijing accent. So, after graduating, I decided to go back to China, and I had the opportunity to work at Google. After having worked at NASA Ames, where they have many partnerships with Google, I kind of saw the difference in culture between the two, between the Google that you see in the United States and just the culture of Google that you find in China. 我发现了中国和美国的谷歌公司的文化有不同。And afterwards, I worked in the technology sector for a while, and here's some of the main differences, some of the most important things that I learned. In fact, one of the first things that I ever learned in my first Chinese class in college was the word 关系. It means relationship. And it is one of the most important things when doing business or just living in China. And in the United States, actually, but for different reasons. In China, it's all about who you know. You know, it's very difficult to succeed in industry unless you know the right people, especially if you're a foreigner. 如果你去一个美国或者欧洲或者外国的一个公司， 你希望进入中国人市场，你需要有关系，现有关系，然后可以生成立的进入中国市场，对不对？So in order to actually enter the Chinese market, you really need to have those relationships. In New Jersey, we say, I know a guy. And in the United States, the way it generally works is relationships are incredibly important as well. But those relationships are formed basically this company, this person, they performed a service and it was good. And so I trust them. Why change it if it's good, right? So that's where it kind of starts. Now, I also had experience learning about the importance of localization. So you kind of have the basic localization of translation. But you also need to understand that just because you translate your product into another language doesn't necessarily mean it is ready to enter the market and succeed. But there's also more than that. There's the cultural side of it. There's whether or not the product is actually, going to be received well by them, and that has something to do with your guanxi, has to do with your relationships. It has to do with the color of your logo, the phrasing that you use. And so I was working in the technology sector, and I decided I'm going to go back to space because I love space. So I joined the dark side. I went over to the space sector, and I found that it was different. Whereas in the technology sector, you pretty much enter the other market. There are, of course, some import-export controls. There's some issues you don't have to go through. But generally speaking, you can do it. Space is a little bit different. Space it carries along with a very high risk. 航天事业带来了很多危险. So every time you're doing something, there's very high risk. But also, at this time, 10 years ago, it's almost all government control. So if you really want to enter the market, you basically need to work with the government. You add on top of that, you have ITAR restrictions, the import-export policies of the United States, and you basically created a culture that makes it almost impossible for a private company to survive. You basically created this wall. 由于有很多危险，有你的政府还有好多的法律，进出口的法律都好复杂。结果特别那个的时候，公司参加这个市场。So it was a little bit different because now you have these gigantic players who have been working in the industry for decades, who have these close relationships with the government, so you've got the guanxi there. But it's so difficult for these new companies to join the fray. So for ITAR, if you're not familiar with it, it basically controls what you can import and export between the United States. And in fact, China is specifically mentioned as some of the focal points of it. So things like satellites, rockets, spacecraft systems, potential military end-use technology, and associated technology. So it's a little bit big. And also associated knowledge. It's not even just a matter of hardware, it's also the information that you bring with you, which creates also a vague map. 所以这些特别复杂的法律变成一种迷宫. You became amazed at how you're actually going to navigate this system. And as a result, it became almost taboo for commercial companies to enter the market. 有好多私人公司希望可以参加这个市场，可是他们避免这个情况，愿意在意这些法律是一种禁忌。But then, of course, whenever somebody once told me, whenever you have something difficult or something annoying, it's also an opportunity to expand. If you're trying to come up with a new idea for a company or a product, ask yourself, what was the last thing that really annoyed you? Because if it annoys you, it annoys other people, and people will, pay for it. And just because something is difficult doesn't mean it's not worth doing. I mean, the United States, the entire program of space started because we want to do the hard things. We want to do it because it's hard, because it's worth doing. So whether you want to look at it from an inspirational point of view from President Kennedy, or you want to look at it from Henry Kaiser, the creator of Kaiser Permanente Hospitals, as a more profitable angle, it's worth doing. So you've got all these companies that have been created over the last 20, 30 years that have been surviving and working with the government closely. And they basically said, hey, government, I can do what you're doing. I can do it cheaper, and you should pay me to do it. And they succeeded. And this has been a huge boom to the generation of new technologies and opportunities for those companies. But generally speaking, they're basically saying, government, you're doing this, I can do it too. And that makes it a little bit easier because you can see where the model is coming from. Now, many of these companies are also those innovators. They are pushing the limits, more so than many other sectors will see. But at the end of the day, many of them are still seeing those restrictions on import, export, and cooperation as too strong or too difficult to manage. But something interesting is happening. We're doing more difficult things. We're doing things that can't be done by one country, let alone one company. So we're in this kind of interesting situation where we have the existing industry that is still doing what it's always been doing, but we're faced with the new situation and the fact that we need to work together, both on government missions as well as private industry. But we're also seeing something else. With the development of new industry with regards to space technology, you're starting to see it become normalized. When I was a kid, nobody goes to space because space was astronauts. Now, you have companies that are sending up mini-sats, nanosats, CubeSats. You have kids in high school building satellites that are going into space. It's something that people can actually wrap their minds around and actually understand, which is creating kind of a new global culture that's completely new, and it's very interesting. But on the other hand, while many of those companies saw the regulations as too strong and unavoidable, others have started to see it as an opportunity. Like I said, every time there's a difficult situation, it's also an opportunity to succeed and accomplish something, and in many of these companies' cases, profit. So what these companies are starting to see is, and they've already emerged, is that as private companies, they also want access to this global market. So they're starting to look to work together with other countries and other organizations to succeed. It's also a cultural shift. As younger people get involved, governments have also recognized the need to have this international cooperation. One example of this is the United Nations recently began a smaller group called SGAC. And this group is geared towards young professionals, getting them involved in space. The United Nations basically turned and said, how can we help young professionals feel like they're actually part of the industry? Because at this time, the industry is made up of older players, people who've been around for decades, and you have all these brilliant young minds, and we're trying to get them acclimated, and trying to get them actually to take part. So how do you do it? Kind of create this new space generation. I've heard the word spacists thrown around over the last couple of months especially, and it's the idea that being in space, in the space sector, makes it different. It's a special thing, and I agree. When we landed on the moon, it was an amazing thing, and it was almost detached from the rest of humanity. And in a way, it physically was, but I digress. But the idea of being a spacist, while it's great to imagine that we're different, that people who work in space are special, it's starting to not only go away, but also almost hurt our ability to move forward, as the need to normalize it is more important, to get everybody involved. So SGAC, the Space Generation Advisory Council, was started in 1999, and originally there were 160 students and young professionals who were invited to join. Since then it's grown much larger, and there are representatives from over 100 different nations who all take part in projects. And it's not just a matter of creating reports and talking to the UN about how young professionals get involved. It's an opportunity for young professionals to actually understand that space, in a way, is a global industry. And we're creating a global network of these professionals, and it's an opportunity that people haven't had in the past. So, it grew from the original 160 members to over 4,000 members. And in fact, just next month, there's going to be our next Asia Pacific conference. And it's an opportunity to introduce young professionals and also expand the reach of young professionals to really globalize the space sector and change the mindset from, I'm from this country. You might be a representative of that country, but you're also joining the global space industry. But on the other hand, you're starting to see, like I said, there are all of these regulations and difficulties that are in the way, but the global industry is also seen as a profitable opportunity for many different companies. So in fact, because there are those barriers to entry, because there's that maze, you start to see different companies all over the world, in every country, starting to emerge and say, hey, maybe you as a government can't work with this other country, or maybe you won't, or maybe this existing company isn't willing to take that risk. You know, go against the taboo, go against the grain, but we will. Whether it's a government that is more geared towards a government-controlled space sector, and you have a company that is emerging as the first commercial entity, or you have a company in a country that has hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of space companies say, hey, there's that really large developing country over there, I need to work with them. But there might be regulations saying, let's see how we can navigate it. And something else interesting is happening. Regulations are changing. Governments want to enable their companies to succeed. By finding those holes in the wall of regulation, you have these companies forcing policymakers to reconsider their previous ideas and their ideals on how the space industry should be controlled and led. And so, while it might be very difficult to directly have countries and governments interact with each other due to already existing taboos, political schemes, different ideologies, what we've seen recently is we're able to expand and improve cooperation, government cooperation, and commercial cooperation through that commercial trade. In addition, just like it was important to have honesty when you come into China, or when in the United States, you know your few people that you can go to, those networks are starting to get broken down. So you see companies like SatSearch is saying, maybe they don't even know what else is out there. So saying, you understand your country. I know you understand your own country. That's fantastic. You understand your own economy. 你最了解你自己的国家，你自己的市场，那怎么办？还有他的国家，他自己的市场，还有别的选择。So by giving them the opportunity to understand the other choices, the other options, you're able to take hold of this new globalized world to improve and have new opportunities of success. So you also have these large companies that it's just really a question of how are we going to push those limits? Is it going to be through AI? Maybe. Is it going to be through space travel? These are basically holes in the wall of government saying, I don't really know how we're going to handle this when it happens. Good luck, and we'll figure it out as we go. And that's really the case that we're running into now. So will we have a space-borne country? Recently we had Asgardia created as an idea. There were tens of thousands of people signing up just to try and say, yeah, I would take part in that. That'd be great. I would love to take part in a space-borne country. So it's actually to the point where people are no longer saying, I represent my own country and I want to enter this other economy. We're actually at the point where people are saying, everything's become globalized. And it's only through this kind of cultural understanding, economic understanding, and increased cooperation and discussion and communication that we can actually get to that point. So the next generation might have an incredibly different viewpoint than I or you. But the trends that we're seeing now are pointing towards a world where it's just globalized. Your first thought isn't as another country, but rather the cultures have mixed to the point where they're more and more similar, especially with regard to business. Thank you.